thanks for joining once again. And yeah, we'll make a start. So I'm just going to quickly do some introductions and give some introduction to the MACC Hub and a few rules around the webinar. And then I'll start covering the main content of today's webinar, background about some of the work that's been going on in the MACC Hub around data visualization tools, including the demo of the tool we've developed, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the end for 10 to 15 minutes or so, or whatever time we have left. So yeah, a few introductions. Who are we and who's going to be speaking today? So I'm Craig Robson. I'm a lecturer at Newcastle University, officially in data-centric engineering, but my expertise are around geospatial data, mapping, climate change adaptation, and sort of infrastructure resilience and so on. So I'm going to be talking a fair amount today, and then I'll let Ben quickly introduce himself.
So my name is Ben Smith. I'm a researcher at Newcastle University. I focus on hydrology, so big scale catchment mapping. I've been working with MACC Hub for the past year, looking at developing the tool that we're going to talk about later.
Thank you, Ben. We'll see Ben pop up for the live demo later. So there's always a nice challenge and risk associated with that. So a few notes in the webinar. The recording has already started, so just making you aware that it will be recorded and it'll be shared afterwards to all those that are registered. And for those that have got any questions or queries that pop up to mind during the webinar, please use the Q&A function. You should see a little button on your screen that allows you to put some questions in there, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation section of today's webinar. And yeah, hopefully it goes well. There's also a chance to give some feedback at the end, and we'll share a link and so on for feedback at the end of the webinar as well. So as I said, I'm going to start off with some background to the MACC Hub. Some of you may be familiar with the MACC Hub, but I thought it's always worth giving a recap for anyone who's new and hasn't maybe come across the MACC Hub, hasn't come to any webinars, what the MACC Hub is about, and give that sort of context. So the MACC Hub is designed as its idea is that we're a knowledge exchange hub. So MACC Hub stands for Maximising Adaptation and Climate Change. So we're about trying to bring together around the UK people who are interested in adaptation and working out and helping support people to achieve greater levels of adaptation, providing that knowledge and experience and bringing together the people who've got experience doing this on the ground, as well as bringing together those who have the knowledge. So people from academia, people from charities, other organisations working in this space, trying to act as a central hub of knowledge, information, and a networking sort of role, and trying to bring these sort of people together, of which these sort of webinars form part of that. So we're trying to just facilitate and help in that, and we're about halfway through the current funding for the MACC Hub as well. So there's still another year and a half to go. So if you've even just become aware of the MACC Hub, there's still lots of time to get involved and engage with the hub. And I guess thinking about what our role is, or what the MACC Hub is hoping to achieve, we're trying to raise awareness around adaptation, but also sort of barriers, and thinking about how we can try to make it easier to maybe resolve or lessen those barriers to adaptation. And we're taking a UK-wide approach, so we'll look at examples from all the different devolved nations around the UK as well. So if we're sort of from the Welsh and Scottish approaches, they have slightly different approaches, maybe what happens in England. So we're trying to learn from each other and progress things to try and enhance the UK as a forward-looking collective around how adaptation is undertaken in addressing a lot of different areas that link to challenges around adaptation taking place. And to help us do that, and part of that process, we try and do that by obviously doing lots of stuff with people. stuff is used very broadly here. But what I mean by that is a lot of workshops and engaging with communities, engaging with local authorities, engaging with stakeholders, people who are interested in making adaptation happen. And we'd like to engage with them, find out what they've been doing, get their feedback on what we're thinking about, and co-develop these ideas and things. And that includes sort of working with some targeted funding to run sort of policy labs and research certain topics that are of interest in specific areas to try and develop the knowledge, as well as look at how we can better apply it and help adaptation happen across the UK. And obviously, to help achieve that, we're not doing that as an individual set of individuals. We're doing this as I said, as a large community. So part of that community, academia plays a very small role in the hub. The hub has a few academic partners, in normally one from each nation in the UK. There's also a lot of other groups and sectors involved, from sort of charity organisations and knowledge exchange partners who are working on the ground, engaging with communities to help adaptation happen. So this diagram just attempts to capture and help understand sort of what we're doing as a hub. It's not just a small selective. We've got a huge number of organisations and partners that we're engaging with actively to explore our aims and objectives as a hub. So thinking about that and sort of moving on, I'm going to move on to what we're doing as what sort of work that me and Ben have been focusing on as part of one of the work packages that's in the central core of the MACC Hub funding. So we have been looking at how we can try and make data and information about adaptation and climate risk more accessible. And yeah, that's what we've been looking at. So obviously, I've just mentioned there the aims of the MACC Hub is around achieving and striving for transformative adaptation, making adaptation, I guess, yeah, giving people the agency to push for greater adaptation in their communities and their organisations, and thinking about how we can do that. And from our perspective, from mine Ben's work, it's been looking at how, and some of the work I'm doing in Newcastle, about how we can make some of that data more accessible, that it gives people that agency, that knowledge, that information to be able to make decisions and push for greater change and the greater role of adaptation as a way of improving resilience and to climate. So we've been working with a whole host of data sets and focusing on how we can better make these available. And I guess we've been focusing on a particular project which called OpenCLIM. Some of you may have heard of this, but I'm going to give a quick recap now of what OpenCLIM is and sort of data we made in this project. So this project itself started a number of years ago, and yeah, as you can see on the screen, there was a collaboration between a number of universities, run by University of East Anglia and the Tyndall Centre, but had various other partners, including the University of Bristol, Newcastle University, UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, CH. And the idea of this project was to bring together, acknowledge that we have a lot of models, we have a lot of data and research that we can apply to understand climate change. But quite often we do this in a not in an integrated way. So we're all work independently. Perhaps we do modelling that doesn't necessarily share the same set of inputs. We use different climate scenarios, different sort of demographic scenarios, perhaps, and so on. This project is about bringing together a collection of models to help us understand climate risk, and doing it in such a way that we integrate into a framework and an approach that uses common aims and objectives, common data sets, to try and create this cohesive picture of risk that's hopefully more understandable, more translatable, and more interoperable at the end of the project. So as I said, this project already finished, but this was the sort of framework that we were using. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen there, we've got 6 themes. So we used a number of different sectors. We focused on these 6 different sort of sectors across the UK, where we could, to look at risk in these areas. And you can see from the framework there, it's quite an integrated approach where we're thinking about climate scenarios, the socioeconomic drivers. So what we have climate impacts. What does that climate impact actually look like for people on the ground? What does the future of the urban areas and where people live look like as well in the future, and how does that affect the climate change and climate risk? How do hazards change, and how does flooding and drought, for example, change? What impact does that have as well? And then also thinking about adaptation as a whole, and what adaptation solutions might be able to be used, and how can we model these in an integrated way where we see changes maybe in urban development, how does that impact on changes in flooding or in agriculture and land use, for example, trying to integrate these models and to create this more this cohesive picture for the UK. And as I said, we also obviously use same set of scenarios. So we focused on warming levels of 2 and 4 degrees. So where we published results from, or those levels, sorry. And then we also incorporated a number of socioeconomic scenarios. So if you're familiar with the UK SSPs or shared structure of pathways, we use 2 of these. For those that aren't familiar with these are sort of the global set of pathways or economic scenarios where predict population change, economic development, and there's 5 sets of scenarios for globe. And for this project, we've used 2 of those that have been downscaled to the UK for a different project. And then we use a number of time steps as well to understand what change happened, particularly in 2050 and 2080. Although some of the models obviously produce results at different time resolutions, so we can look at more better times of a greater range of time steps for some of those models. We also, as I said, we looked at those 6 sort of themes, and the idea is this multi-sector approach, so we can look at different sectors where all the input parameters are the same and try and attempt to look at some of the interactions between these sectors. So how do changes in agriculture might that affect drought, for example? Obviously, it's really complicated and challenging. So we did this in the project, and I'm not going to get into detail, but there on the screen there you can see a nice complicated flow diagram of just one of the sort of, I guess, the model workflows we developed, where we have lots of models talking to each other, pre-processing data inputs and a series of outputs that we can use to then look at results and look at risk. As a national case study, we looked at the whole of the UK where we could. Some models, for example, didn't necessarily cover coastal areas where perhaps we've got tidal effects. Some areas haven't included Northern Ireland due to data availability, but where possible, we aim to look at the UK as a whole. But we also focused on particular areas. So, for example, we looked at the Clyde region up in Glasgow. We looked at Norfolk Broads. We did a case study in the Highlands, and as well as one in Northern Ireland, to try and demonstrate how these outputs, although the national scale, can be used at a more regional level to understand climate risk. And those 4 case studies have all obviously now been completed, and there's various reports and publications out about them as well. So just thinking about some of the data that came out of this project and some of the stuff we want to visualize in a more interactive way rather than doing these bespoke case studies. Some of the data include a sort of urban flooding. So how does flooding in urban areas, for example, change given climate change and different scenarios, and what sort of adaptation strategies might be used that might reduce that urban flooding impact. So from the top right of the slide there, you'll see a couple of images of Newcastle, where we're looking at how adaptations reduce the potential damage, estimated damages, due to a 1 hour 35mm rainfall event, so a sort of extreme rainfall event for 1 hour, and looking at how adaptation actually reduces that impact under SSP2 scenario, 2-degree warming for 2050, for instance. And we have these sort of results for urban flooding for a range 5 or 6 cities across the UK, looking at different scales of in different types of urban environments. We also have thinking about extreme heat, so flipping from water to heat, but thinking about how extreme heat impacts mortality rates in the UK. So just the results on the screen there just highlight using the SSP set economic pathway and thinking about how that changes between 2050 and 2080 from what it currently is in terms of number of deaths that might occur per year due to the number of days of increased heat waves that occur and the impact on health that has. We also have results that look at levels of drought, for instance. So thinking about this is work that Ben helped to do as a hydrologist, thinking about if we have these hydrology river catchments, there's increased levels of changes in rainfall patterns through climate change. How does that affect the drought patterns that we might see? What catchments might be exposed to more days or more months of drought conditions? Some catchments obviously may see less depending on rainfall patterns, but trying to look at how that affects the UK across all different river catchments. And then finally, the last image on the right there is looking at agriculture, looking at how the yield from wheat, so wheat fields, wheat production, obviously quite a significant crop grown across a fair amount of the UK, how that might be affected in future climates due to changes in the number of rainfall days when rainfall occurs and changes in heat and so on. So just giving a flavour of the sort of outputs we have there about risk, not just to, let's say, human conditions, but also the biodiversity as well. So we have other outputs I've not shown here, looking at how biodiversity and refuge is impacted and so on as well. So there's a lot of results there, and it's all quite complicated. So how do we make this sort of data more accessible, so people who maybe have less knowledge or less awareness of the impact on these specific as well? How would you make it engaging for researchers, potentially other practitioners working in the adaptation sector, or even the general public, and giving them the confidence to make a difference? So I guess what we've done is we during the MACC Hub work is we've looked at what different tools exist and how can we learn from what they've done to make our data sets more accessible in a way that's easier for people to understand. What we've done isn't necessarily do anything. The way of doing it, there's no right or wrong answer, but we had a look at a number of tools, at least to get it. And there's lots of tools out there. So I'm just going to touch on 3 or 4 that for maybe as examples that we've looked at more, we've explored more, but these are 3 or 4 that we've picked out as potentially nice ones to think about. So this is what we call a climate risk indicators map that was produced part of the UK Climate Resilience Programme a few years ago, which looks at the different risks of different risks from climate, focuses on climate variables. So we're looking at changes in temperature and rainfall and so on. So it doesn't go necessarily into the depth of looking at some of the modelling that we've done, such as like agriculture impacts and stuff like that. It's more about the climate and how the climate's going to change. But what it's really good at is being able to show the data well. We have graphs, we have maps. It's relatively straightforward to navigate. We can change different variables, look at different scenarios. So it allows you to explore a little bit how the UK might change and look at those different variables around different climate change scenarios, looking at different temperature scenarios and so on, to look at those sort of things, how they might change. Another one some of you may well have heard of is obviously the Local Authority Climate Explorer from the Met Office, which allows us to explore climate variables again, but does what this adds above the previous tools, add some textual narrative to some of the results that are shown there. So we can zoom into a local authority, we can have a look at that local authority, we can have a look at different climate variables, how heat's going to change, how rainfall might change, for example, how things are going to change over time. Again, focus on climate variables, but it now gives a textual narrative. So if you're not familiar with those climate variables, there is some support and text to help you understand and navigate what you're looking at as well. And yeah, I'm going to quickly hand over to Ben for the next couple.
Sure. So this is a nice example from a group at UCL. So it takes some quite complex climate data and it simplifies it down to local MP constituencies. So every hexagon you see here is a constituency. They've been arranged in a slightly non-geographical way, so it's a bit different to what the sort of map you might expect is, but you can see you've got a chunk for Northern Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales. And the good thing about it is it's really simple. So it takes a very complex data set and simplifies it down. So if you want to look at temperature or rainfall days or max rainfall, you can very easily select your variable, select a current or future period, and just get a single number, which is really good. But there's obviously sort of something to be aware of with simplifying complex data down just to a single number, and how we lose a bit of our sort of understanding of uncertainty there. And then the next one, please, Craig. So this is a really nice one, the Copernicus Interactive Climate Atlas. It gives a global sort of data set, so you can see a big picture of the world in the bottom left. You can scroll around, you can look at different areas on that, and when you interact with a certain area, so whether that's a part of Africa or Europe or a capital city, it gives you these great graphs which contain a lot of information. So I thought it's a good one for demonstrating how you can actually put a lot of data onto a web page and still get quite a clear visualization from it. So here you can clearly see the precipitation is sort of increasing past 2020. That's all for me, Craig.
Perfect, thank you, Ben. I'm just going to finish off on this one. So this is, again, it's thinking not just on the UK, but the Climate Impact Explorer looks at climate impact. It's a global tool, so it allows us to look at, again, the climate changes in climate across any nation, a lot of in the world, and we can zoom in and we can have a look at different nations. We can also allows us to interactively build the charts, so we can compare different sectors, different climate options. So look at precipitation, look at how the precipitation varies per model. So on screen there you can see sort of how you can look at how the climate is going to change against different scenarios, and look at how those variables change. Again, this is quite easy to navigate. We've got 4 very simple drop downs at the top. There's a couple of different applications, the ways of getting into the data. So it's a large data set, but then we've got this simplified sort of approach using simple drop down menus to be able to narrow down and focus in on specific data and have that catalog of tools that allow us to look at the data. Again, yeah, I've just shown a plot, but it does allow you to look at visually as well, and compare maps beside each other to be able to look at how things change over time. So again, it's a nice example of how we can, from something based outside the UK, and how we can actually do that as a wider tool. That's what I was going to say. I know a lot of you have probably explored climate data and thought about and looked at tools. So I'm not going to bore you with lots more tools. But basically, that hopefully just trying to show for those that maybe are less familiar that there's a large wealth of tools already out there. There's a huge amount of data. And every tool is different, and there is no one right tool. Every tool has a different purpose, has a different target audience, and every user is different in terms of how they want to access data, what they want to see. So the challenge becomes almost, I think I've got later on in one slide, an optimization problem, optimizing a tool that works for as many people as possible for your target audience, accepting that you're never going to keep everyone happy, you never can develop a perfect tool. So that's sort of a bit of background to what how we've got there. And so yeah, I think I'm going to hand over to Ben now.
Great. Yeah, so hopefully, if you'd like to follow along the tool with us, then you're very welcome to. I'll run through it on my screen. But if you want to have a play with it while I'm talking, then you're very welcome to. You can scan this QR code you can see on the screen, or you can type in that URL. I think I can also put it in the chat. So there should be a link to it in the chat.
Probably done.
It will work on a phone, but obviously phones are quite small, so it can compress things down a bit too much. So you might want to do it on a laptop instead. Oh, you've already done it. Great. Step ahead. I'll try and share my screen while that's happening. Okay, so hopefully you should be able to see what I'm looking at now. This is the landing page for the tool. So our dashboard is our attempt at making the OpenCLIM data a lot more accessible. So we're here to try and move it from online repositories and academic papers into a platform where anyone can access it. We're trying to make the tool as simple as possible, but while keeping enough information present to give people enough understanding of how the data was created and the uncertainty around it, in the hope that that data will be used sort of correctly. We explored a lot of different formats, but we decided to go with an ArcGIS story map. So there's quite a few different things we could have used, but this one is open access. It's free robust, so it'll work across different devices. It also allows us to make a platform without having to invest heavily in the back-end architecture. So there's no coding involved with this, just a sort of decent amount of GIS, but otherwise it's pretty simple. It also lets us to share all the GIS data sets pretty easily, so more advanced users can download the data themselves if they want to do their own investigations or their own visualizations. It allows us also just to update it as we go. So if in too much time we decide we want to add a new bit, we can do that pretty easily and then publish it when we're ready. So it's one of the reasons we decided to use a story map instead of just a purely map-based dashboard or a data-based dashboard, is that it allows us to match up text with figures and maps. And you can create a sort of a narrative that guides users through the data. So we start with a brief introduction, a bit of background to climate change. It says climate change is happening. Then we move on to what the tool actually is, and then how to use it. And hopefully the interface is simple enough that just a simple user guide will enable anyone who comes to the website or the platform to interact with it fully. So you don't need a huge amount of training, or hopefully any training, to be able to interact with it. So the first example I thought I would talk through is fluvial flooding. So this shows the changes to river flows under a climate change scenario. So we've tried to keep all the information brief and to the point. So we have the climate impact and the relevance. So warmer, wetter winters have direct local consequences, leading to more extreme floods. We talk about what the map is showing. I'm not sure this is the right one. Do some scrolling around as if it refreshes. Okay, there we go. Yeah, we talk about what the map shows. So the impact of a 2-degree warming on a 100-year flood, and a takeaway. So we see that flood risk could increase everywhere, with significant flows in the 2030s, increase in flow in the 2030s. We then have some instructions on how to use the map and a bit of further detail. So with all the tools in here, we've gone through various feedback sessions with different groups and tried to incorporate feedback from different people. So one of the issues was about what the grey areas are on the map, so we've made sure to include that. Hopefully users will, after seeing this, decide to interact with the map. So they can do that, they can scroll around. There's legends, there's, they can go to their own area. So we're based in Newcastle, so we can look at River Tyne and get some statistics for the River Tyne. So, and more statistics than we've just outlined on the main map. So 2 and 4 degrees warming, different flood events. Yeah. And so hopefully people can get there, both a national picture and an understanding of what's going on in their local area. And all the maps we have are interactive in the hope that people will really engage with what they're looking at. So we've got a bit more content on floods. We've got here we have also tried to align the OpenCLIM work with existing products. So this is the EA flooding from rivers and sea map. So again, people can scroll through the map, they can look at their area, they can use the slider to look at current risk and future risk. They can go through their own regions. They try and get like a multi-scale understanding. So you've got that national scale on the map above, but also a more local scale. One of the challenges with this is that different data sets are different in the different countries. So you see here, this is just for England. We wanted to do this for Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, but it just wasn't feasible, either due to the size of the data or the access to the data. So the EA really helpfully display this data as a WMS layer, so you can just access it online whereas the other agencies weren't quite as simple to interact with. So there's a little bit of difference between different regions, but we've done our best to try and cover everywhere. So that's maybe like another point, is that during the OpenCLIM project, we had a lot of time and effort invested into making sure that all our scenarios were linked up and comparable. So everything uses similar data sets, similar timeframes, similar SSPs, all the same kind of data. And so that meant it was very easy for us to link those scenarios together and to visualize them. So most of the data sets here all have the same inputs. But when we're trying to interact or link those outside data sets, it does get a bit more complex. So I think it's just a pointer that when we're doing all these modeling or visualizations, how important it is to try and sync up what we make with whatever exists if we want to try and compare things. So as we scroll through, we've then got some other data sets. We've got some low flows. So the count of low flow days, so how many more drought days you'll get per year, which is always normally worse in the southeast. We then have some surface water flooding. So again, linking up the national picture, or sorry, the existing national data sets from the EA with our OpenCLIM work, where we convert that into a more generalized data, or sorry, damages format. And then on to heat. So with our heat data, we've chosen to display heat mortality because it's a fairly simple to understand metric. So we have some simple stats on it. Then, and again, some maps. So we can scroll through different time periods. So we have near past, near future, far future. And in this example, as Craig was mentioning earlier, we also looked at SSPs. So shared socioeconomic pathways. So essentially, each pathway shows a different development possibility. So some have high population, low population, movements to urban areas or rural areas. And this highlights one or brings one and a challenge of the situation really is that when you've got so many different data sets that you're trying to communicate, so one of 5 SSPs, it's very hard to do that in a way that's still possible to communicate without having to put in a lot of background information. So all the data we've shown has all had large simplifications involved in it. So going down from 12 different climate scenarios down to 1 or a median, simplifying things down to a single SSP, because if not, it just adds far too much complexity. So we've also tried to include as much information as is needed. So we can scroll down through the platform. Again, I've got some information on agriculture and highway impacts. Again, all interactive. We're trying to get some information for the users. So this is the stuff we have on floods and droughts. And so it's quite a challenge to get the right level of information here. So you don't want it to overwhelm, but equally you need it to be, people inevitably do have questions you want to address, and you want people to have enough of an understanding. So there's quite a lot of information at the bottom, and links to the more academic sources. And this is something we found people had a lot of opinions on. So some people wanted lots of information, and some people just wanted the bare bones. So we've hopefully done a sort of a good compromise on that. So we also have go down to data access. So try and move all the data out of quite deep data repositories. It's all available through those platforms. So people can either look at the data that goes into these maps themselves, or they can look at the raw underlying data, and they can also get a very scientific background behind it. Then at the very end, we have feedback, where people can engage with the. Oh, that's bad news. Can't submit. Oh well. Hopefully, once we fix that, we will be able to submit some feedback, and we can hopefully try and continue improving the platform, adding data sets that people want to do or want added, or simplifying things, or whatever it might be, and try and make sure it's used and useful as much as possible. think that's all I've got for the platform, Craig. If you'd like to go back to the presentation. Yeah, so there's a few challenges. I've gone through a few of them as we've run through. If you have the next slide, Craig. So in terms of interoperability, the format was a bit of a challenge to get started with. So we tried to put quite a few different options. I say the story maps approach seemed to be the sort of simplest with greatest yield for inputs. There's a whole host of different climate data that went into this platform, or could have gone, that went to OpenCLIM. So choosing which of those were the most effective for communicating was quite important. Again, there's a lot of different spatial resolutions, so making sure we had an appropriate spatial resolution that would be understandable and relevant for users, and the dataset size. So a lot of the datasets we had to simplify just to make it sort of feasible to have them shown on an online platform without being extremely slow. Then, in terms of user knowledge and perspective, so the data complexity, as I said, we had to really simplify things down. In terms of user knowledge, we had to sort of debate where to pitch this. We were trying to move away from that academic focus that we already had with different repositories and papers. So our hope is that anyone can access this, anyone can understand it, to try to make it as simple as possible without it becoming wrong or not having enough information to actually represent it accurately. And then a big challenge with the user interface preferences. Everyone has a different idea as to what they would like on it. And so trying to make sure that you have something that works, I think, was the most important thing, and achieves the goal and satisfies people where possible. Back to you, Craig.
Thank you, Ben. Helps to unmute. Thank you, Ben. I'll spend a few minutes summarising, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So if you've got any questions, feel free to start putting them in your Q&A, and we'll come on to them. So obviously we've developed a new tool, and that process has been an enjoyable one, but also a challenging one. And as Ben said, a lot of the issues that come up with is around the climate data, the suitability of the data, and how interoperable data is. Obviously, even using a project like OpenCLIM as an example of how that data is generated, there's still a vast amount of data, and it's complicated, it's complex to understand, and trying to distill that into an easy way to access it that people that haven't worked on the modelling aren't experts is complicated, and it's a challenge. And as Ben said, we've had a few feedback sessions with people, and other parts of the MACC Hub are doing that as well, and so there's more reports due out later in the MACC Hub life timeline, which will distill a lot more of that information that we've learned from speaking with stakeholders and in June workshops about how people engage with data visualization and data tools to understand and learn about climate change and adaptation. This is just the first sort of iteration of this tool, and hopefully as we go on we might be able to update and reflect on some of the learnings from those a bit more, and those workshops are still ongoing, and hopefully we can reflect some of the outputs from those a bit more in what we've developed. As I mentioned, tools and services are never important. Climate services are really critical, but obviously there's such a vast array of them as well. It can be overwhelming at times, and I think we've attempted to develop a tool that has a number of good aspects that we've learned from other tools, or have the narrative to support people who don't necessarily understand climate change and some of the sectors we've looked at that necessarily maybe don't get all the mainstream press and the impact on those sectors. So we've tried to do that within our tool, whilst also using this platform. So people are familiar with ArcGIS online tools, the Met Office MACC Hub that we mentioned there, MACC tool we mentioned there, for example, that is based on ArcGIS Online. So we tried to pick a tool and a platform that, as Ben said, it has longevity, but it's also people have some degree of familiarity with it, hopefully, because they've seen it used in their applications. So to hopefully remove that barrier of learning how the application works by giving something that is relatively straightforward. does mean we've simplified the data perhaps in places and simplified the story, but it means people can actually access it and hopefully understand it. And that comes back to the last point on there is about optimizing the solution. It's impossible to get all the data from OpenCLIM into a single tool. It's just too complicated, it's too much. And the same probably applies for a lot of other data sets. So trying to simplify that down to give the optimal solution where there's still enough data and information there, but it's not too complicated for people to engage with or get overwhelmed by. So yeah, that's what hopefully we've achieved and we've done. And as Ben said, like we've got a tool now that hopefully people can look at, and people can also try and give some feedback on and think about how we can maybe develop it further going forward, where we have the capacity to do so. So going to end there. I'm going to open up the Q&A session now. I know there's a few questions coming in. So please the Q&A, please put your questions in the Q&A thing, and then we'll start going through some of them.
Yeah, I see Charlotte's asked what a WMS is. So I mentioned that briefly in terms of the data sources. So that stands for a web map service. And so there's different ways of accessing data or to put it on the platform or a general ArcMap story map platform. You can either upload the data directly to the website and to the ArcGIS server, or you can use this WMS layer, which is like an online connection to another data set. So that requires internet connection, and every time you look around the map, it's sucking in more data from that data source. So it's good for the bigger high-resolution national data sets, because it means you just sort of bring in what you need as you need it. Whereas if you're going to upload a whole high-resolution surface water flood risk map, that would be a massive upload, and whenever you load the map, you would be hosting a huge sort of quantity of data, and it will just run very slowly. So web map services is like an online connection to another data set, and it's really easy to use. So you can use them in QGIS and stuff really easily. I guess ArcMap's pretty easy. But yeah, they're pretty good, pretty useful.
Hope that answered that question. I'm going to go to Q&A. I'm just going to start going through some of the questions there. So we've got a couple. So Stephen has asked how often those will be updated with the latest data. So at the moment, the tool is using, as I said, data from the OpenCLIM project, and that project finished a year and a half ago. So those data sets aren't being updated. There is the capacity potentially to drop in new data sets that are of particular interest as they're generated due to the nature of the platform. But at the moment, there's no sort of set plan on how we will update the data sets or think about how they change over time. Where we're going to focus on, at least for the rest of the MACC Hub, is keeping the tool, making the tool as good as we can and as open as can for those conversations to happen around adaptation. At the moment, there's no plans to, I guess, update it. I will answer Lynn's, and Ben, you can answer Becky's question. So Lynn's asked various sectors and whether there's any work on social care. In OpenCLIM, we didn't look at social care. As I said, we looked at the risk. We looked at risk to a number of, I guess, sectors, but we didn't go to the level of looking at social care or other sort of, I don't know what's the best way to describe them, sort of services or public services. So we haven't looked at that level of detail. There may be other work out there that has. I'm not familiar with it, but it may well be. But no, we haven't looked at that in this tool or what was done in OpenCLIM. Ben, do you want to? You're muted.
Becky says, can the images and/or data in the tool be reproduced or used in other reports? And what's the citation? So yes, so all the data in there is published. It's all academic reviews, apart from the infrastructure or highway stuff, which is new but in the process of being published. So you can use that and reproduce it and put it in reports. The citation is a good point. There isn't a formal citation for it yet, other than just referencing the MACC Hub impacts of climate change dashboard, we might be a good thing for us to put on a citation at the bottom for future. If someone wants to cite that in the future. And obviously all the data, you could go back to the original source if you wanted to. If that answers that, Becky. Sam had another question that's maybe for me. So how are the increase in high flows calculated? Is it based off how mean rainfall changes, or is it a factor-based approach? So all of the hydrology and all of the flooding-based information on here is done through actual flood models. So a lot of the different dashboards that Craig and I showed earlier were just using climate data, whereas the OpenCLIM stuff is all putting that climate data through models. So all the climate data, all the hydrological models will have taken climate data inputs. So that will include your increased rainfall or different rainfall patterns, different PET, and it'll reprocess that through catchment models to then get a change in flow. So it's more complex than just a factor-based or rainfall-based approach. So it should be fairly solid. And that should also include your extremes. Within reason, it's daily data, but it should do extreme daily rainfall.
Thank you, Ben. I'll pick another couple that I can see. So Hugo's asked, who are the intended users of the tool, and you're intending policymakers to make use of this tool to make decisions? So for the tool itself, I guess the key is primarily I guess to some extent policymakers, so maybe local authorities who need this extra information or after some easy to access climate data, but also I guess a large proportion of our sort of target audiences is those working in community groups and community organisations where we don't have the time or the skills to go away and find climate data and be able to work with it and create maps and understand it. So one of the ways that this tool can obviously be used is for them is that narrative approach makes it easy to understand what's going to happen, and they're able to explore in more detail what's going to happen. Some of the other tools that that were coming out of the OpenCLIM project, one being developed by UEA, produces sort of local authority level outputs as well. So that's something maybe worth exploring on the Tyndall website, on the OpenCLIM web pages as well, and the MACC Hub web pages. There's another tool which is less dynamic and it's more static outputs, but it allows you to explore at a local authority level. And that sort of information may be also applicable to policymakers for making decisions as well. I'm going to take Gemma's question next, I think, and then I'll let Ben take a couple. Is the data provided robust enough to be applied to or inform a climate change risk assessment for organisation, or is it more favourable to use UKCP18? So I guess the data in this our data in this tool and UKCP18 are a little bit different in terms of the data that's available. UKCP18 is focused on sort of how those weather or climate parameters are changing. What OpenCLIM has done is use those weather and climate parameters to look at the risk in sectors like agriculture and to hydrological flows and stuff like that. So they're a little bit different in terms of UKCP18, for example, has been input into our models that then derive the risk data we've given. So a little bit of difference between those two sort of data sets, if that makes sense. Ben, have you picked the?
There's a few to say. Just adding to that, they say the data should be robust enough to be applied to inform climate change risk assessments. And the hydrology stuff is being used, I think, in this latest CCRA report, as far as I'm aware. So just working the top. So did you incorporate crop models to simulate wheat growth and productivity? Yes, that was done. That was done by CEH, so Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. I don't know enough about that to give a better answer, I'm afraid. But yeah, they looked at both the wheat yields and also the different suitability for different crops as we go into the future. And there's a link to their papers, or at least one of them, on the tool. Is there a way to layer vulnerability on the impacts map to produce a RAG rating system for different impacts? There's not yet, so we've not got that vulnerability aspect to it. It's maybe something we could do in the future, but it's sort of beyond the scope to what we were initially doing. Henry, how are the NAFRA2 and OpenCLIM surface water maps merged? So they're different, fully different projects, or products rather. So the OpenCLIM surface water maps were based on a certain just input rainfall, whereas the NAFRA2 maps are separate things. We're just trying to give a sort of an overview of the flood risk and then an aspect of damages. So that those surface water flood maps from OpenCLIM are most used for case studies. So they're not directly comparable, but hopefully can sort of complement each other.
I've got another question to address. Someone's asked about can we recommend risk assessment tools to provide higher resolution downscaled future temperature projections suitable for building scale analysis? So again, it's not. I'm not. Yeah, I guess me and Ben were neither. Yeah, I guess there's no recommended tool for doing that. I don't think. And yeah, I guess for building level indoor overheating, it's a lot more complicated because you need to consider the environment, the urban environment. Let's say if we're thinking about overheating in buildings. So there is, I guess, there's difficulties in producing models that give us heat data at that sort of level, that sort of resolution. As you may be aware, very rarely do you get 1 kilometer resolution or less. And I think that's probably sort of what you're suggesting. And yeah, unfortunately, there's no real data sets that I'm aware of that are reliable at that level. There may be some tools, and it's not my area of expertise, the urban heating and that heat aspect of data. But yeah, as far as I'm aware, I can't think of anything that would address that building level temperature projections, basically.
Yeah, I had a quick flick through the people on the chat. I couldn't see if there was OpenCLIM heat people in it or not. If there are any OpenCLIM heat people who would know the answer to that, then do feel free to click it in the chat.
Okay, interesting question from Emily. Do you have any research on the kinds of questions that different audiences are asking when they look at climate resilience data? Which audiences are best served by this tool? Which audiences have questions and needs that are not well addressed? Very good question. Something I guess we'd like to know the answer to as well, especially that last bit around what doesn't this tool address for users. As I said, we've tried to develop this with a few stakeholders and users giving feedback on what we've done as we've gone along, and there's been a series of workshops through the MACC Hub which have explored that in more detail and are still ongoing with their workshops, and they'll be complete hopefully in the next 6 months. So I guess which audiences are best served by a tool at the moment, we can only give our perspective on that, and which, yeah, I think it's very much target the community groups where they don't have that climate background and knowledge, and they don't have the ability to go in and create some of these sort of maps and this information which they might need. So I guess that's who we feel maybe is best served by it, but we're happy to be proved wrong if other people come up and say we've been using this, it's really great, and so on. We're happy to be proved wrong by that as well. I think that sort of answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, so Damien, you said, how does the tool inform on climate resilience, especially at a local level? So we've not really covered much in the terms of resilience. So the OpenCLIM project did a lot of, or a fair bit of adaptation. So we're trying to merge adaptation into the modeling. So like for example, the flooding work, we would also try and do it with different natural flood risk management scenarios. I think the surface water flooding did permeable pavements and different things. So there's a interest in that adaptation during the OpenCLIM project. We've not been able to incorporate much of that into this tool. and again, probably not at a local level due to it was quite a national approach. So yeah, I think that's probably not quite in our remit. So we don't do much on that at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And where does 2 minutes or 3 minutes to 2 o'clock and our scheduled finish? I think we've answered all the questions. Apologies if I've missed any. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. If anyone's got any other questions, feel free to follow up with us. On the screen, there's still a QR code to give feedback on the webinar and the link to the MACC Hub website. Feel free to get in touch with us after the meeting. Our details will be on the MACC Hub website as well. And yeah, thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your days.